Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. Got to tell you, I'm just double, triple, quadruple excited today because today is the day I am formally introducing and taking orders on, pardon me, my my brand spanking new book, Resurrection Feast Fulfilled, a study of the connection between between Israel's last feast days, which was Sukkot, and yes, I know about Shemini Atzeroth, yes, and I discuss it in this book. But the connection between Sukkot and the resurrection. Now, I've told the story many times before of how I was raised in an environment, a theological environment, in which Israel's feast days were given little, if any, attention. Um, if anything was said about the feast days at all, it was the fact that Jesus died as the Passover lamb. A little bit of discussion was okay, here's Pentecost, Feast of First Fruits, and that's typological. And the day of Pentecost was the first fruits of the ingathering of those converted to Christ. That was the end of it. I do not remember a single preacher in my fellowship of the churches of Christ who made any discussion of Yom Teruah, i.e., Rosh Hashanah, the Feast of Trumpets, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, and Sukkot, the Feast of Harvest, the Feast of the Ingathering. Not one single time do I remember a discussion. Now, is it possible that there were some ministers in my fellowship that discussed it, that believed in them, that saw the significance? Well, certainly it's possible. I did not know all of them. I did not listen to all of them. But I can tell you that the representative men, certainly the most prominent men that I followed as a young man growing up in that fellowship, literally had no clue whatsoever about the significance of the feast days. It was not until I heard an incredible lesson by David Curtis of Berean Bible Church, and then about that time also, I became familiar with Bill Cannengeiser. Now, Bill Cannengeiser, as I have said, was a walking encyclopedia when it came to the feast days. He lived, breathed, ate, everything about Bill when it came to Scripture was about the feast days. So between David Curtis and Bill Cannengeiser, I was introduced to the subject of the feast days. And folks, I've got to tell you, it literally blew my mind. I embarked on a study of the feast days at that present time. And I have to tell you, I'm still learning every single day. It is such a vast, marvelous, wonderful subject. And it is one that, listen to me very carefully, still in the all-millennial world, the feast days, for all practical purposes, are ignored. Lip service is given to them. N.T. Wright, who is not a post-millennialist, at least officially, but N.T. Wright says all of the feasts were fulfilled by Jesus. Does he expound even a little bit on them? On the significance of Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot? No, he does not. At least I haven't found it in his books, if he did, and I've read a whole lot of his books. When you read postmillennialists such as Kenneth Gentry, Keith Matheson, even Gary DeMar. Gary DeMar says the feast days were fulfilled in Jesus. Well, Christ is the fulfillment of the feast days, but it was not at the cross, because Paul in Colossians chapter 2 says, let no man judge you in respect of new moons, feast days, and Sabbaths, which are, present tense, a shadow of the good things that are about to come. By the way, Gary DeMar has done a great job lately in pointing out that the significance, the meaning of mellow with the infinitive as used in the New Testament, as used in Colossians, indicates imminence. So here's Paul writing in approximately 62 AD saying that the feast days, the new moons, the Sabbaths, and by the way, all of the feast days were Sabbaths, that those typological feast days had not yet been fulfilled, but they were about to be fulfilled from Paul's perspective. The book of Revelation depicts the final fulfillment of Sukkot with the ingathering and the new creation. Folks, resurrection and Sukkot go hand in hand. These are just a minute portion of the issues that are involved. One of the most significant, there are two key issues here that I just want to mention briefly. And by the way, this book was 5 years in production by me in my research and writing. I would write on it. I would research more. And I've got to give a great big shout out to my good friend, pardon me, Robert Cruikshank. I call him my PDF guy. Robert has this innate ability or incredible ability to find incredible PDF studies by scholars on almost any subject. So when I told him what I was doing, and I was entering some of the final stages of particular parts of this book, he started sending me PDF studies. I was just unbelievably excited about this. So Robert Cruikshank is to be given a tremendous amount of credit for the content of this book. All right? I just want to make that clear. Oh, and by the way, let me also make incredible acknowledgements. Karen Rogers, wonderful lady, did an awful lot of the proofreading. Well, not an awful lot of it. She proofread the thing. Okay? My friend Tom Klosky from Arkansas went through the book, generating my indices, my bibliography. David Kuhn, who's a very professional, I guess you call him typesetter. He works journalistically, formatting, working with the internet, working with publications. It was David who put the book in its final form to make it acceptable for publication. I cannot say enough about the wonderful contributions these three individuals made to this book. So I just want to get that on the record. So anyway, there are a couple of key issues that I investigate in this book. Now, mind you, there are many more than two, all right? For instance, I discuss the last days, the last time, the last day, and the last hour. You see, there's a progression in the New Testament. And the New Testament writers are very clear that the time of the last hour had arrived upon them. That's how critical it was. And yet we have former preterists who like to make the argument, you know what? The last day has to be the last day of time. Well, that's a massive, massive presuppositional false argument. But it's about the only argument these individuals have. Who said that the last day has to refer to the last day of time or the last day of the Christian age? There's no text that says that. That's presuppositional eisegesis. Okay? So, I have a very lengthy study of this concept. The last time, the last days, the last day, and the last hour. I tell you, a couple of particular studies that are found in this book, and I'm trying to give you a little bit of a feel for what I present in this book. I begin by sharing how the Jews looked at Sukkot. What did they think? What are the ideas that they associated with Sukkot. Boy, I got to tell you, this is rich, rich stuff. Another very special study that I have in this book, which is a good lengthy discussion. By the way, the book's over 450 pages long. But another concept is the episynagogy. Now, if you've watched Mike Sullivan and me in our preterist apologetics videos, you know that we've discussed episynagogy a good bit. Well, in this book, I have a whole lot more. You see, the episynagogy was an eschatological term for the end time harvest. You know, Sukkot. For the end time resurrection. Episynagogy and resurrection and Sukkot are absolutely Siamese twins. They cannot be divorced from one another. So when Jesus talked about the episynagogy, he was talking about Sukkot. He was talking about resurrection. Another very, very, very key word that is related to this entire issue of Sukkot and resurrection is the Greek word kairos. Folks, kairos means divinely appointed time. And in the Old Testament, you find kairos being used over and over and over again for the divinely appointed time of the end. Daniel 9:27, Daniel 12, verse 4, Daniel 12:13. So here we find a critical word, kairos, the divinely appointed time. The divinely appointed time for what? For the resurrection, for the coming of the Lord, for the judgment, for the establishment of the kingdom, for the new creation. All of these themes were appointed to come at the right time. And you got the New Testament writers, including Jesus, of course, who didn't write a book, but he inspired them. We have the New Testament writers saying over and over and over again, the appointed time had come. Now, you see, the reason this is so important, folks, that I developed in this book, in the Old Testament, the appointed time was far off. It was not near. Daniel was told this explicitly. But the New Testament writers say that the time foretold by the Old Testament prophets, which was not near in their day, had now come. You think that's not significant? And so all of the efforts that are made by former preterists and all futurists to say, oh, well, the end is always near, that's ridiculous. You'll just have to excuse me for being blunt, but that concept is absolutely ridiculous. The appointed time, the kairos, was not near in the Old Testament. The Old Testament writers were explicitly told so, but the New Testament writers, who say they were anticipating the fulfillment of what the Old Testament writers said, foretold, and that those Old Testament writers who said it was not near, the time was not near, the New Testament writers say, guess what? The time had arrived. So this ridiculous statement, well, the time is always near. God, Jesus, is always at hand. No, he's not. Is there both a spatial and a temporal thing? Is God always near us spatially? Yes, of course. His presence is always with us, especially for children of God. But there's a special eschatological sense in which the coming of the Lord was not near in the Old Testament, but was near in the New Testament. Okay, so I developed that extensively in this book. Let me just read to you a couple of more headings, chapter headings, okay? I have a special study of Daniel 9:24 and following on Sukkot and Shemini Atzerat. Chapter 6, Zechariah 14, the Feast of Tabernacles. After the coming of the Lord, after the judgment, and the arrival of the new creation, Feast of Tabernacles. Chapter 8, festal imagery in 1 Corinthians 15. I got to tell you, folks, I never saw this for many, many, many years. But 1 Corinthians 15 is absolutely chock full of festal imagery. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that since Christ was the first fruit and the harvest is at the end of the age, i.e., the end, then that means that Paul was anticipating the fulfillment of Israel's last feast day, i.e., the Feast of Sukkot. And that means that Sukkot was the fulfillment of the law of Moses. Technically, again, Shemini Atzerat, but I hope you get the idea. So the fact that Paul uses festal imagery so much in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 is incredibly important for understanding the time frame of the fulfillment of 1 Corinthians 15. It's not at the end of the Christian age. It was to be at the end of the Old Covenant age. Chapter 11, Revelation 11, Sukkot, salvation. Entrance into the most holy place. Chapter 12, temple, eschatology. Temple to telos. Chapter 13, as noted, the last days, the last day, the last hour. Chapter 14, the last day resurrection, the appointed time for the fulfillment of Israel's calendar. Chapter 15, Kairos, the appointed time of the end. Chapter 17, the importance of Zion in messianic prophecy and the resurrection. Oh, incredible stuff. Chapter 18, a critical examination of Steve Gregg's missing word and different word hermeneutic. Now, why did I put that in there? Well, because as you know, those of you who've been watching my videos, you know that Steve Gregg says that preterism is completely false. And one of the reasons for it is because he says, well, Don Preston places an inordinate amount of attention, pardon me, on Israel's feast days as if they are significant to the fulfillment of the resurrection. Well, yes, I do put a whole lot of emphasis on the fulfillment of the feast days and the resurrection, but I don't think it's inordinate. But here's the problem. Steve Gregg puts no emphasis whatsoever on the relationship between Sukkot and eschatology, and in order to justify divorcing Sukkot, divorcing the feast days from eschatology, he has to resort to what I call the missing word, different word, hermeneutic. Because the New Testament doesn't say, oh, resurrection is the fulfillment of Sukkot. In those specific terms, Steve would argue, see, no relationship whatsoever. And so you get an idea, I hope, of what is in this cram-packed, full, comprehensive, well, let me say, I left out a ton of stuff. I knew I would have to make this a 2-volume set to include everything I wanted to. But I hope you're as excited as I am. Again, today is the very first day that you can order it. My inventory is supposed to be in today. I'm filming this real early of a morning, so I don't know if it came in today. But nonetheless, we'll have a banner right up at the very top of DonKPreston.com, BibleProphecy.com, and you can click on it. You can go ahead and order. If the inventory does not come in today, believe you me, we will start filling those orders the moment that we get my inventory in. So today is my thrill day to introduce to you my new book, Resurrection Feast Fulfilled. I hope you'll take advantage and order the book. Hey, I will see you on Friday as we continue and maybe even conclude our study and response to Steve Gregg's book, When Out Full Preterism. And then, Lord willing, Mike Sullivan and I will be back with you on preterist apologetics. In the meantime, thanks again for joining me. I'll see you on the flip side.